Imagine this. A 10-year-old black girl stands trembling in a small-town convenience store, tears streaming down her face as handcuffs click around her tiny wrists. "I didn't do anything wrong," Mina cries, her voice breaking with fear. "Save it," Officer Tully snaps, his gaze cold and unrelenting. The bystanders watch in stunned silence, some clutching their shopping bags, others whispering behind raised hands. The store's owner, Clifford Barnes, points to the grainy security footage playing on a nearby screen. "She's with him," Barnes insists, his voice sharp. "The man who ran out? She's his accomplice." But is she? The truth is more complicated, and the stakes are about to get much higher. On the ride to the station, Mina's sobs are drowned out by the roar of a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulling up beside the police car. "Dad!" Mina screams, pounding on the window. The car screeches to a halt, and a man in a tailored suit storms out, his voice thundering across the street. "Let my daughter go." What would push a seasoned officer to arrest a child? And what happens when this father, armed with power and determination, takes on a system built to dismiss voices like his? Before we dive into the story, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a situation like this? Or perhaps you've faced a moment where standing up for what's right was the only choice? Let us know. Where are you tuning in from today? It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss out on the next twist in this journey. Let's jump right into today's story. The town of Maplewood was the quintessential small-town America. Its cobblestone streets wound through rows of quaint, tree-lined homes that seemed plucked from a vintage postcard. The townsfolk often greeted one another with nods and smiles, a picture of harmony on the surface. Yet beneath this serene facade lay unspoken tensions, divides born of quiet prejudices that rarely reached open conflict but subtly influenced daily life. At the heart of Maplewood's community stood Clifford's General Store, a bustling hub where residents gathered to shop and catch up on local gossip. It was a place of familiarity and routine, a reflection of the town's charm and its undercurrents of unease. In a modest yet cozy house near the town center lived the Harper family. This morning, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as Mina Harper, a bright-eyed, curly-haired 10-year-old, skipped into the room. Her boundless energy was as infectious as her ever-present smile. "Good morning, sunshine." Her mother, Evelyn Harper, greeted warmly as she flipped pancakes on the stove. Evelyn exuded a calm, steady presence, a beacon of love and wisdom in Mina's life. "Morning, Mom," Mina chirped, hopping onto a chair. "Did you sleep well?" Evelyn asked, sliding a plate in front of her daughter. "Yes, I even finished my school essay," Mina said, excitement dancing in her eyes. "It's about kindness. Ms. Harlow says kindness is like a candle. One candle can light up 1,000 others without losing its glow." Evelyn paused, her heart swelling with pride. "That's a beautiful thought, Mina. You truly are the brightest candle in my life. Never forget that, no matter what happens." Mina beamed, her chest puffing with pride as she began to eat. After breakfast, Evelyn handed Mina a short list. "Can you run to Clifford's and pick up these items for me?" she asked. "Of course, Mom," Mina said, grabbing the list and her small canvas bag. "Be careful and come straight back," Evelyn added. Mina nodded, her curls bouncing as she headed out the door. Clifford's General Store was a hub of activity that morning. The familiar creak of the wooden floor greeted Mina as she entered, her eyes scanning the rows of shelves stocked with everything from fresh produce to household essentials. "Good morning, Mina," called Sarah Thompson, the store's kind-hearted security guard. "Hi, Ms. Thompson." Mina waved as she began browsing. Unbeknownst to Mina, Elroy Davis, a man in his mid-40s with a weary, disheveled appearance, had been loitering near the canned goods aisle. Elroy's sharp eyes darted around the store, his movements jittery and calculated. As Mina picked up a box of cereal, Elroy approached her. His voice was low but friendly. "Hey there, sweetheart. Could you help me out for a second?" Mina looked up, slightly startled but polite. Sure. What do you need?" Elroy held out a plain-looking tote bag filled with items. "Can you hold this for me? My hands are full and I just need to grab one more thing." Without hesitation, Mina nodded. "Okay." But as she held the bag, a loud alarm blared through the store. The sudden noise startled her, and she froze in place. "What's happening?" Mina asked, clutching the bag tighter. Elroy's face shifted from feigned calm to panic. He took a step back, muttering, "Sorry, kid," before bolting out the door, leaving Mina standing there, bewildered and frightened. The store's owner, Clifford Barnes, stormed out from behind the counter, his face reddened with anger. He was a stern man, known for his no-nonsense approach to running his store. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his sharp eyes landing on Mina. I don't know," Mina stammered, her voice shaking. He asked me to hold this." Clifford snatched the bag from her hands and began rummaging through its contents. Among the regular grocery items were several small, expensive trinkets, with the store's tags still attached. "This," Clifford declared, holding up one of the items, "is stolen merchandise." Sarah Thompson stepped forward, her brow furrowed in concern. "Clifford, she's just a child. Maybe nothing, Sarah," Clifford barked, cutting her off. "I have the security footage to prove it." The grainy footage showed Mina holding the bag and speaking with Elroy, who appeared to slip out unnoticed. To Clifford, this was all the evidence he needed. "She's working with him," he said firmly. "I'm calling the police." Tears welled up in Mina's eyes. "Please, sir. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't know." Clifford ignored her pleas, dialing the number with a grim determination. Mina stood frozen, her small hands trembling as the weight of the situation bore down on her. The bustling store seemed quiet, every gaze turning toward the frightened girl. Sarah knelt beside Mina, speaking softly. "It'll be okay, sweetheart. Just tell them the truth." But Mina's tears continued to fall as she whispered, "I don't understand. I just wanted to help." The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, marking the arrival of the police and signaling the start of a storm that would upend the peaceful facade of Maplewood. The hum of chatter in Clifford's general store was abruptly silenced by the shrill wail of approaching sirens. Outside, a squad car screeched to a halt, and two officers stepped out. Officer Grant Tully, a stern, middle-aged man with a reputation for being unyielding, and his younger colleague, Maria Perez, known for her meticulousness and empathy. Inside the store, Mina stood trembling, her tear-streaked face a picture of confusion and fear. Clifford Barnes gestured toward her with an accusatory hand. "There she is," Clifford barked. "Caught red-handed with stolen goods. The camera footage will back me up." Tully entered, his boots thudding heavily against the wooden floor. His cold gaze swept over the scene, landing squarely on Mina. Beside him, Maria scanned the room, her eyes narrowing at the tension emanating from Clifford and the huddled figure of Mina. "She's just a kid," Maria whispered to Tully as they approached. "We should—" "Let me handle this," Tully cut her off. Clifford wasted no time ushering Tully to the store's security monitor. The grainy footage replayed the events. Mina accepting a tote bag from Elroy, who then slipped away as the alarm blared. "See?" Clifford said, his voice rising. "She's his accomplice." Maria frowned, leaning in to scrutinize the video. "It's not exactly clear. She looks confused, not complicit. Maybe we should question her first." Tully straightened, his jaw tight. "There's no need. The evidence speaks for itself." Sarah Thompson, the store's security guard, stepped forward cautiously. "Officer, I don't think she knew what was happening. Mina's a good kid. She's never caused trouble before. Clifford scoffed, waving her off. Camera footage doesn't lie, Sarah. Tully's voice was hard as steel. Let's settle this. Tully strode toward Mina, who flinched as he approached. Her voice wavered as she tried to explain. I didn't do anything wrong, Mina pleaded, her small hands shaking. I was just trying to help him. Tully loomed over her, his expression unforgiving. Save it. You're old enough to know better than to help a thief. Without further warning, he pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Mina's cries grew louder. No, please, I didn't mean to. The metallic click of the cuffs snapped around her wrists, silencing her. The scene drew gasps from the other shoppers, and Sarah stepped forward again. Officer, is this really necessary? She asked, her voice trembling. Tully glared at her. Justice is necessary. This will teach her a lesson. Maria watched, her lips pressed into a thin line. She jotted down notes on her pad, her disapproval clear but unspoken, for now. As Tully led Mina out of the store, Maria fell into step beside him. We should have waited for more information, she said firmly. There's no harm in double-checking the facts. There's no time for that, Tully snapped. The evidence is crystal clear. We have a job to do. Maria's voice dropped, sharp with reproach. You're basing your judgment on assumptions, not facts. You don't even know who the man is. She's holding the bag. That's enough for me. Maria bit her lip, the tension between them palpable. That's not how justice works, she muttered, more to herself than to him. Mina sat in the back of the squad car, her tiny frame hunched and shaking. The handcuffs felt heavy and alien around her wrists. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to make sense of what had happened. Please, she sobbed, her voice cracking. Please, you have to believe me. I just wanted to help him. He said he needed me to hold the bag because his hands were full. Tully glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his expression cold and unmoved. Save your tears. Playing the victim won't help you here. I'm not lying, Mina cried. He looked tired. I thought I was doing something good. Tully's tone was dismissive, almost cruel. Kids your age learn how to lie early these days. This won't work on me. From the passenger seat, Maria clenched her fists. She made a mental note to include Tully's remarks in her report. The car rumbled along the cobblestone streets of Maplewood, but Mina barely noticed the familiar scenery passing by. Her mind was a whirlpool of fear and confusion. She remembered her mother's words from that morning. Hai luon lam jio jung kon ne. Hadn't she done the right thing? Hadn't she tried to help someone in need? But now, her good intentions felt like a cruel betrayal. Tears blurred her vision as she gazed out the window, wondering how this had spiraled so far out of control. As the squad car turned onto Main Street, Mina's heart skipped a beat. Through the blur of her tears, she spotted a sleek black Rolls-Royce parked outside the town's bank. Her breath caught in her throat. She recognized it instantly. It was her father's car. Dad! She screamed, her voice hoarse but desperate. Dad, help me! The Rolls-Royce's door swung open and Cedric Harper stepped out. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his commanding presence turned heads even on the busiest of days. Cedric's sharp gaze locked onto the squad car. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he recognized the tear-streaked face of his daughter in the back seat. "Stop that car!" Cedric roared, striding toward them with purpose. Tully slowed but didn't stop, his jaw tightening. "Keep driving," he muttered, his grip on the wheel firm. But Cedric wasn't one to back down. He turned sharply, rushing back to his car and slamming the door shut. The powerful engine roared to life, and Cedric pulled into traffic, determined to follow them. Mina pressed her face against the window, watching as her father's car grew closer. Hope flickered faintly in her chest, mingling with her fear. As Tully's squad car sped toward the station, Cedric kept pace behind them, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and resolve. "Dad," Mina whispered to herself, her voice trembling, "please don't let them take me." The chapter ends with Cedric's car tailing the squad car, his determination a beacon of hope as Mina's world teeters on the brink of despair. The squad car rolled steadily down Main Street, its engine humming against the quiet tension inside. Mina sat in the back seat, her small hands clenched together, her tear-filled eyes fixed on the passing scenery. Her heart raced with fear and desperation. From the corner of her eye, a flash of sleek black caught her attention. Mina turned toward the window, her breath hitching. It was her father's car, a gleaming black Rolls-Royce parked outside the town bank. "Dad!" she screamed, slamming her palms against the glass. "Dad, help me!" The Rolls-Royce door opened and Cedric Harper stepped out. His tall frame and sharp suit radiated authority as he turned to locate the source of his daughter's voice. Cedric's eyes locked on the police car, and he froze for a moment, disbelief etched across his face. Then, in a flash, his expression hardened. He strode forward, his booming voice cutting through the tension. "Stop that car!" Inside the squad car, Officer Grant Tully glanced in the rearview mirror, his jaw tightening as he spotted Cedric. "What now?" he muttered under his breath, his irritation evident. Beside him, Maria Perez shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She could sense the storm brewing. Cedric reached the middle of the road, planting himself firmly in the squad car's path, his hand raised in a commanding gesture. Tully had no choice but to brake. The car came to a screeching halt. Tully stepped out of the car, his expression cold and dismissive. Cedric approached, his measured steps belying the anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. "Why is my daughter in the back of your car?" Cedric demanded, his voice low but firm. Tully crossed his arms, his tone laced with condescension. "Your daughter is being taken in as an accomplice to theft. The evidence is clear." Cedric's eyes narrowed. "Evidence? You mean assumptions? She's 10 years old, officer. A child. Do you really think she's capable of committing a crime like this?" Tully shrugged, his indifference cutting. "Old enough to know right from wrong, Mr. Harper." Cedric's voice rose, barely contained. "I want to see the so-called evidence you're basing this arrest on." Tully stiffened, his eyes glinting with annoyance. "I don't need to show you anything. The law doesn't bend for wealthy men looking to save face." "Don't talk to me about the law," Cedric shot back. "What you're doing here isn't justice, it's prejudice." Tully's voice grew colder. "Money doesn't change facts, Mr. Harper, and it certainly won't buy your way out of this." From her place beside the squad car, Maria silently watched the confrontation unfold. Her discomfort deepened with every word exchanged. Cedric turned to her, his voice steady but commanding. "And you, Officer Perez, do you support this? Do you think it's right to arrest a 10-year-old based on nothing more than conjecture?" Maria hesitated, her gaze flicking between Tully and Cedric. "Mr. Harper," she began cautiously, "I think there are procedures that could have been handled differently." Tully shot her a sharp glare. "Maria, stay out of this." She bit her tongue, but the tension in her posture spoke volumes. Cedric straightened, pulling his phone from his pocket with purpose. "If you won't do this by the book, I'll ensure someone else does." Tully frowned. "What are you doing?" Cedric didn't answer. He dialed a number and brought the phone to his ear. "Chief Whitman, it's Cedric Harper. I need you to intervene immediately. My daughter is being unjustly arrested by one of your officers." On the other end of the line, Chief Marla Whitman listened intently. The name Tully and the words "unjustly arrested" were enough to make her sigh in exasperation. Her history with Tully was fraught with disagreements over his methods and attitudes. "Mr. Harper, I understand your concerns," Whitman said evenly. I'll contact Officer Tully now and ensure the situation is handled appropriately." "Thank you," Cedric replied, his tone sharp with restrained anger. Moments later, Tully's radio crackled to life. Whitman's voice came through, firm and commanding. "Tully, this is Chief Whitman. I'm instructing you to bring the suspect to the station immediately and follow proper protocol. No shortcuts." Tully's jaw tightened as he responded. "Yes, Chief." Turning back to Cedric, he said curtly, "She'll be taken in according to protocol." "That's the best I can offer." As Tully climbed back into the squad car, his movements stiff and deliberate, Cedric stepped closer to the window where Mina sat. She pressed her hands against the glass, her tears flowing freely now. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. Cedric placed a reassuring hand on the window. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." He turned back to Tully, his gaze icy. "I'll be right behind you, and you'd better pray you don't give me another reason to escalate this." Tully said nothing, his frustration evident as he started the car. Cedric walked briskly to his Rolls-Royce, the powerful engine roaring to life as he followed the squad car at a close distance. Inside the squad car, Mina stared out the rear window, watching her father's car closely. Despite the fear gnawing at her chest, a glimmer of hope sparked within her. In the front seat, Maria sat in tense silence, jotting notes in her pad. She glanced at Tully, whose expression was a mix of annoyance and defiance. The two cars wound through the streets of Maplewood, the confrontation leaving behind whispers and speculation among the townsfolk who had witnessed the spectacle. As the police station loomed closer, Mina clung to her father's promise like a lifeline. For the first time since this nightmare began, she dared to believe that she might not face it alone. The harsh fluorescent lights of the police station felt cold and uninviting. Mina Harper, her wrists red and sore from the handcuffs, was led to a small holding room. Her heart pounded as she sat on the bench, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. The sterile room around her seemed to amplify her confusion and despair. Outside in the main lobby, Cedric Harper paced furiously. His phone was pressed tightly to his ear, his voice firm and steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "I need you at the station immediately," Cedric barked into the receiver. "My daughter has been wrongfully arrested, and I want this resolved as quickly as possible." The lawyer on the other end reassured Cedric, but the weight of the situation hung heavily on his shoulders. He glanced toward the hallway where Mina had been taken, his jaw tightening. "Hang in there, baby girl," he muttered to himself. "Daddy's going to fix this." Meanwhile, back at the scene of the alleged crime, Maria Perez was meticulously combing through evidence. Determined to uncover the truth, she began reviewing the area surrounding Clifford's general store, her sharp eyes scanning for anything the initial investigation might have missed. Parked awkwardly in a side alley near the store, a dusty old sedan caught Maria's attention. The car seemed out of place amidst the town's usual well-maintained vehicles. She approached cautiously, her instincts piqued. "Let's see what we have here," she murmured, pulling out a flashlight. Peering through the window, she spotted several items strewn across the back seat. Among them were small trinkets bearing Clifford's store logo, the same items reported stolen. Maria's heart quickened. She noted the license plate number and entered it into her tablet's database. Within moments, the results flashed on the screen. The car was registered to Elroy Davis, a known petty thief with a record of similar offenses. "Gotcha," Maria whispered under her breath. She immediately grabbed her phone and dialed Chief Marla Whitman. At the station, Chief Whitman was reviewing paperwork when her phone buzzed. She answered briskly, her voice authoritative. "Whitman speaking." "Chief, this is Perez," Maria began, her tone laced with urgency. "I found a vehicle near the store containing the stolen items. The car is registered to Elroy Davis. He's got a record, and I'm confident he's our suspect." Whitman's eyes narrowed as she leaned back in her chair. "Good work, Perez. Round up a team and start tracking him down. I want him in custody before the end of the day." "Yes, Chief," Maria replied, a note of satisfaction in her voice. Whitman hung up and sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. The situation was escalating quickly, and the more she uncovered, the less comfortable she felt about how it had been handled thus far. While Maria coordinated the next steps, tensions inside the station continued to simmer. Cedric, his patience wearing thin, approached Officer Grant Tully, who was leaning against a desk, arms crossed defensively. Cedric's tone was calm, but laced with steel. "Officer Tully, I want to know why you arrested my daughter without substantial evidence." Tully barely glanced at him. "The evidence was clear. She was holding the stolen goods." Cedric's voice rose slightly. "Did you bother to ask her how she got them? Or did you just assume she was guilty because of how she looks?" Tully's eyes flared with anger. "Don't try to turn this into something it's not, Mr. Harper. If you don't want your daughter getting involved with criminals, maybe you should teach her better judgment." Cedric stepped closer, his posture towering and imposing. "You listen to me, officer. My daughter is a child. She didn't get involved with anyone. She's being scapegoated because it's easier than doing your job properly." The room fell silent as several officers glanced nervously at the exchange. Maria, returning from her investigation, paused at the doorway, taking in the scene with a furrowed brow. Tully's voice was tight with barely concealed irritation. "I don't have to explain myself to you. If your daughter didn't want trouble, she shouldn't have taken the bag." Cedric's composure slipped for a moment, his voice thundering. "You're an embarrassment to that badge. This isn't justice. It's laziness fueled by your prejudice." After the heated exchange, Cedric returned to the waiting area, pulling out his phone once more. His lawyer answered on the first ring. "I need a formal complaint filed against Officer Tully," Cedric said curtly. "I want the local government and media involved if necessary. This stops here." At the same time, word of Mina's arrest began spreading through the small town. Social media posts and whispered conversations painted contrasting pictures of the incident. While some defended Tully's actions, others expressed outrage at the apparent injustice. Chief Whitman began to feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Public opinion was shifting rapidly, and the pressure to act decisively grew stronger by the minute. Inside her holding room, Mina sat curled up on the bench, her head resting on her knees. The tears had stopped for now, replaced by a heavy numbness. Her mind replayed the events of the morning over and over. She thought of her mother's kind words, her father's reassuring presence, and the terrifying moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "What did I do wrong?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. Meanwhile, in the chief's office, Whitman summoned Tully. He entered stiffly, his expression unreadable. Whitman didn't mince words. "We need to talk about your handling of this case. There are concerns about your judgment." As the conversation began, Maria gathered her team to track down Elroy Davis. Outside the station, Cedric's Rolls-Royce remained parked, its presence a silent testament to a father's determination to protect his child. The chapter closes on a tense, unresolved note. Mina's tears, Cedric's unrelenting fight for justice, Maria's pursuit of the truth, and Tully's increasingly precarious position. The quiet tension inside the police station was shattered by Cedric Harper's unrelenting determination. Standing in the corner of the lobby, Cedric ended yet another phone call. His contacts stretched far and wide, and he intended to use every ounce of his influence to shine a light on the injustice his daughter was facing. One such call was to Alex Norwood, a tenacious local journalist known for exposing corruption and systemic failings. Cedric's voice was calm but commanding. "Alex, I need this story out there." My daughter is being scapegoated because of assumptions and biases. The people need to know." Alex agreed immediately. Within the hour, he arrived at the station, his notepad and recorder in hand. The moment he stepped inside, his sharp eyes swept the room, taking in the uneasy atmosphere. Spotting Officer Grant Tully, Alex approached with purpose. "Officer Tully," he began, "I'm Alex Norwood with the Gazette. Can I ask you a few questions about the Harper case?" Tully frowned, his body language defensive. "There's nothing to say. I followed procedure," Alex pressed on. "Procedure? Are you confident your actions were based entirely on evidence and not personal bias?" Tully's face reddened. "I don't appreciate your tone, Mr. Norwood. I did my job, and this whole thing is being blown out of proportion." Standing a few feet away, Maria Perez watched the exchange closely. She jotted notes in her small notebook, her expression neutral, but her mind racing. Tully's defensiveness was telling, and she knew it would be a key point in her eventual report to Chief Marla Whitman. As the hours passed, the town of Maplewood began to buzz with the unfolding controversy. On social media, posts about Mina's arrest quickly went viral. Some residents expressed support for Tully, arguing that he was simply doing his job. Others voiced outrage, condemning what they saw as a clear example of racial bias. "Tully's just enforcing the law," one commenter wrote. "If the girl was holding the stolen goods, that's on her." "This is ridiculous," another countered. "She's a kid. Where's the compassion?" The divide wasn't just online. At Clifford Barnes's store, regular customers began to question his involvement in the situation. "Did you really call the cops on that little girl, Clifford?" one customer asked, her tone sharp. Clifford bristled, his face reddening. "I did what I had to do. Theft is theft." But as the day wore on, sales began to dwindle, and Clifford felt the sting of growing disapproval. He glanced uneasily at the dwindling crowd, a knot forming in his stomach. Back at the station, Maria waited until she found Tully alone in the break room. The room was dimly lit, with the faint hum of a vending machine filling the silence. "Tully," Maria began, her tone firm but controlled, "we need to talk about the Harper case." Tully didn't look up from his coffee. "What about it?" Maria stepped closer, her voice low. "You're making a mistake. If Elroy Davis is the real thief, Mina Harper is completely innocent. You're risking everything on an assumption." Tully's eyes flicked to her, his expression hardening. "I've been in this business a long time, Maria. I know who to trust and who not to." Maria didn't back down. "This isn't about experience. It's about bias. You've let your prejudice cloud your judgment, and now a 10-year-old girl is paying the price." Tully slammed his coffee mug onto the table. "Don't lecture me, Perez. I don't need you questioning my methods." Maria's gaze didn't waver. "Your methods are going to backfire, Tully. And when they do, it won't just be your career on the line. It'll be this department's reputation." She turned on her heel and left, leaving Tully alone with his thoughts and the growing weight of his decisions. Determined to uncover the truth, Maria returned to her investigation. The information she had gathered from the abandoned car led her to a run-down apartment complex on the outskirts of Maplewood. Checking the tenant records, she found what she was looking for. Elroy Davis had rented an apartment there under a pseudonym. Maria immediately contacted her team. "We've got a solid lead on Elroy. Let's move quickly. If we catch him, we can clear this mess up before it gets worse." Her colleagues nodded, their faces set with determination. Within minutes, they were en route to the location, ready to bring the elusive suspect to justice. Meanwhile, back at the station, Cedric Harper stood outside the holding room where Mina was being kept. Through the small window, he could see her curled up on the bench, her face buried in her knees. His heart ached as he watched her shoulders shake with silent sobs. Despite his wealth and influence, Cedric had never felt more powerless. "This is my fault," he muttered to himself. "I should have protected her better. I should have taught her to be wary of people like that man." The lawyer he had called earlier approached, placing a reassuring hand on Cedric's shoulder. "We're going to fight this, Mr. Harper. The evidence is already pointing in your favor." Cedric nodded, his jaw tightening. "It's not enough to clear her name. I want accountability for what's happened here. Someone needs to answer for this." As the day wore on, tensions at the station continued to rise. Maria's team closed in on Elroy's location, their radios buzzing with updates. In the chief's office, Marla Whitman summoned Tully for a private conversation. "Tully," Whitman began, her tone sharp, "we need to talk about how you've handled this case. There are concerns about your judgment." Tully bristled but said nothing, his silence speaking volumes. In the holding room, Mina sat quietly, her tears drying but her heart still heavy. She thought of her mother's words about kindness, wondering how her good intentions had led to this nightmare. The chapter ends with multiple threads of tension: Cedric's unwavering resolve, Maria's pursuit of justice, and Tully's precarious position. The stage is set for the truths that will soon come to light. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desolate streets of Maplewood's industrial district. Once a bustling part of town, it was now a maze of abandoned buildings and overgrown lots, a fitting hideout for a man on the run. Maria Perez led a small team of officers through the crumbling neighborhood. Their footsteps were careful but deliberate, their radios buzzing softly with updates from nearby patrols. "We've got a visual," one of the officers whispered, pointing toward a decrepit house at the end of the block. Maria raised her hand, signaling the team to halt. She surveyed the building, its windows shattered and walls graffitied. From inside, faint movements suggested someone was there. "Elroy Davis," Maria called out, her voice steady but firm. "This is the police. We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, a frantic shout erupted from inside. "You're not taking me in!" Suddenly, the door burst open and Elroy emerged, dragging a security guard in front of him as a human shield. A knife gleamed in his hand, pressed against the terrified man's throat. "Stay back!" Elroy shouted, his voice shaking. "I swear I'll do it!" The officers drew their weapons, but Maria held up a hand. "Hold your fire," she ordered calmly. Maria took a cautious step forward, her hands raised in a gesture of non-violence. "Elroy, listen to me. You don't want to do this." "I don't have a choice," Elroy snapped, his eyes darting wildly. "You don't know what it's like to live like this, to have no way out." Maria's voice softened. "You're right, I don't. But I do know that this doesn't have to end badly. You've made mistakes, but you can stop this from getting worse." The security guard whimpered, and Elroy's grip faltered slightly. "I didn't mean for things to go this far," he muttered, his voice cracking. Maria seized the moment. "Then let him go, Elroy. Nobody has to get hurt. If you surrender now, I promise you'll be treated fairly." Elroy hesitated, his eyes filling with tears. "You don't understand. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just needed a way out." Maria stepped closer, her voice unwavering. "You have a choice, Elroy. Right here, right now. Don't let this mistake define you." The room seemed to hold its breath as Elroy slowly lowered the knife. He released the security guard, who stumbled forward into the waiting arms of another officer. Elroy dropped to his knees, his hands raised in surrender. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Back at the station, Elroy sat in an interrogation room, his hands cuffed and his shoulders slumped. Across the table, Maria Perez leaned forward, her tone measured but firm. "Elroy," she began, "we need to understand why you involved a child in your scheme. Mina Harper is just 10 years old. She didn't deserve this." Elroy buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled. I didn't mean to hurt her. She looked so innocent. I thought no one would suspect her if she held the bag for me. Maria's expression hardened. So you exploited her kindness? You used her trust against her? I didn't think it would go this far, Elroy exclaimed, his voice cracking. I thought I could get away clean, but when the alarm went off, I panicked. I ran and left her behind. I didn't mean for her to take the fall. Maria's voice softened slightly, but her eyes remained sharp. Do you realize what you've done to her? You've turned her life upside down. Elroy nodded miserably. I'll take whatever punishment I deserve. Just tell her I'm sorry. Maria rose, her gaze lingering on him for a moment, before she turned and left the room. Chief Marla Whitman gathered Cedric Harper and Mina in her office. The tension in the room was palpable as Whitman began to speak. Mr. Harper, Mina, she said, her tone measured. I owe you both an apology. Elroy Davis has confessed to the theft and admitted to using Mina to carry out his crime. Mina is completely exonerated. Tears welled up in Mina's eyes as she turned to her father. I didn't do anything wrong, Daddy. I just wanted to help him. Cedric knelt beside her, pulling her into a tight embrace. No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. You have a kind heart, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. This isn't your fault. Whitman watched the scene silently for a moment before continuing. I assure you, we will be reviewing this case thoroughly to address the mistakes that were made. Mina should never have been put through this ordeal. While Cedric and Mina were finally reunited, Officer Grant Tully was called into Whitman's office. He entered stiffly, his expression a mix of defiance and unease. Grant, Whitman began, her voice cold. What you did in this case wasn't just a mistake, it was a failure to uphold the principles this department stands for. Tully bristled. I was acting on the evidence. Don't, Whitman cut him off, her tone sharp. You acted on assumptions and biases. Your actions didn't just harm Mina Harper, they damaged this department's reputation and the community's trust in us. Tully's shoulders sagged slightly, but he said nothing. Whitman leaned forward. You'll be held accountable for this. Expect disciplinary action and consider this your final warning. One more misstep and your badge is gone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Cedric and Mina walked out of the station hand in hand. Mina's face was streaked with tears, but a small smile played at her lips. Maria Perez stood nearby, watching the father and daughter with a mix of relief and lingering unease. She was glad Mina was free, but the damage left behind couldn't be ignored. Cedric paused as they passed Maria. Thank you, he said simply. Maria nodded. She deserved justice. I'm just sorry it took this long. Mina turned to Maria, her voice soft. Thank you, Officer Perez. Maria smiled gently. You're welcome, Mina. Take care of yourself, okay? As they walked away, Maria's gaze lingered on their retreating figures. In her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. The town of Maplewood would have to reckon with the cracks exposed in its foundation. The weight of the last few days bore down heavily on Officer Grant Tully. The revelation of Mina Harper's innocence and the confession from Elroy Davis had unleashed a torrent of criticism. Within the police department, Tully found himself the subject of hushed conversations and cold stares from his colleagues. The once solid camaraderie he enjoyed had eroded. Outside the station, the community's outrage was palpable. Social media platforms buzzed with demands for accountability. Sitting in the corner of the break room, Tully sipped his lukewarm coffee in silence, his usual composure cracked. His hands trembled slightly as he set the mug down, his mind replaying the accusations he'd faced. Tully, the chief wants to see you, a junior officer informed him, breaking his reverie. Tully nodded and rose slowly, bracing himself for what was to come. Chief Marla Whitman sat behind her desk, her expression a blend of disappointment and resolve. Tully entered the room, his posture rigid, but the usual confidence in his gait was missing. "Take a seat," Whitman said curtly, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Tully obeyed, his gaze fixed on a spot on the desk, avoiding her piercing eyes. Whitman didn't waste time. "Grant, I want to hear it from you. Why did you handle the Harper case the way you did? What made you act so hastily, without proper evidence?" Tully fidgeted slightly. "Chief, I thought I was acting on instinct. It felt clear to me at the time." Whitman's tone sharpened. "Instinct? Or bias?" Tully glanced up, his jaw tightening. "I wasn't biased. I've dealt with cases like this before. The evidence seemed clear, and I acted accordingly." Whitman leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "You think that justifies what you did? You arrested a 10-year-old girl without fully understanding the situation. You let your personal prejudices cloud your judgment." Tully opened his mouth to respond, but Whitman cut him off. "You thought wrong, Grant, and this department is paying the price for your mistakes." Her words hit like a hammer, and Tully sat in silence, unable to muster a defense. The meeting left Tully feeling exposed and vulnerable. Returning to his desk, he stared blankly at the pile of paperwork before him. His thoughts began to drift, unbidden, to a part of his life he had buried deep. The memory came rushing back. Tully was just 10 years old, much like Mina, living with his parents in a modest neighborhood. One evening, his father, a delivery driver, had returned home visibly shaken. His clothes were torn, and his face bore the marks of a violent altercation. "What happened?" young Tully had asked, his voice trembling. His father knelt before him, his hands resting heavily on Tully's small shoulders. "Some men tried to rob me today," he said, his voice strained. "They were dangerous people." Though his father never explicitly mentioned their race, the image of the assailants, 3 black men, was seared into Tully's young mind. He overheard neighbors gossiping about the incident, their voices tinged with fear and prejudice. "That area's a hotbed for crime," one neighbor had said. "You can't trust anyone from there." For years, Tully carried the memory of his father's injuries and the whispered words of his community. Slowly but surely, those experiences shaped his worldview. Tully rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the past. "They say time heals all wounds," he murmured to himself. "But some wounds never really go away, and maybe I've let mine fester for too long." His voice faltered as he added, "And now, a little girl has paid the price for my failure to let go." Later that evening, Tully found himself standing outside Chief Whitman's office once more. He hesitated for a moment before knocking. "Come in," Whitman called. Tully entered, his face set with determination. "Chief, do you have a minute?" Whitman glanced up from her paperwork, gesturing for him to sit. "What is it, Grant?" He took a deep breath. "I need to admit something. I've let my past dictate how I approach my job, and I realize now that it's been affecting my judgment." Whitman's expression softened slightly, though her tone remained steady. "Acknowledging that is a start, but it's not enough. What are you going to do about it?" Tully leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "I don't know where to begin. I've made mistakes, big ones, but I don't want to be the person who lets those mistakes define him." Whitman nodded. "Grant, mistakes don't define us. It's how we address them that matters. If you truly want to change, you'll need to start by holding yourself accountable and learning to see beyond your own biases." Her words struck a chord, and for the first time in years, Tully felt a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Chief. I won't waste this chance." As the station quieted for the night, Tully found himself alone in the break room once again. On the table before him lay the case file for Mina Harper. He opened the folder and stared at the photo clipped to the first page. A snapshot of Mina smiling brightly, her eyes filled with innocence and joy. The contrast between that image and the terrified child he had seen in the holding cell was stark. "How could I let this happen?" he muttered, his voice breaking. "How could I let my pain cause so much harm to someone so undeserving?" The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the vending machine. Tully leaned back in his chair, the weight of his remorse pressing heavily on him. For the first time in his career, he realized that the path forward wouldn't be about enforcing the law. It would be about finding a way to rebuild trust, both in the community and within himself. Tully closed the folder and sat in the stillness of the room, his thoughts consumed by a single question: can I ever make this right? The chapter ends on a note of introspection and the beginning of transformation, as Tully confronts the depths of his past and resolves to forge a better future. Cedric Harper was not a man to let injustice go unanswered. After securing Mina's freedom, he turned his focus to holding the Maplewood Police Department accountable for their mishandling of the case. Sitting across from his lawyer, Cedric's voice was resolute. "This isn't just about Mina," he said firmly. "This is about ensuring no other family has to endure what we did." The legal proceedings began with a formal complaint filed against Officer Grant Tully and the department. Cedric's lawyer built a compelling case, supported by Elroy Davis's confession, the video evidence, and Tully's own conduct. At the public hearing, the tension was palpable. The courtroom was packed with townsfolk, reporters, and representatives from the police department. Cedric sat beside his lawyer, his hand resting protectively on Mina's shoulder. The lawyer addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to confront a failure in our justice system. Officer Tully's actions were not guided by evidence but by prejudice, leading to the wrongful arrest of a 10-year-old child. This cannot be ignored." The presentation included clips from the security footage and excerpts of Tully's statements during the case. Each piece painted a damning picture of a man whose actions were colored by deep-seated biases rather than professionalism. As the hearing concluded, Chief Marla Whitman stood to announce a town hall meeting, inviting the community to address the incident and discuss reforms. The meeting took place in the town's community center, a large hall buzzing with anticipation. Tully stood at the podium, his usual air of confidence replaced with visible discomfort. He cleared his throat, his hands gripping the edges of the podium tightly. "I've come here tonight to say something I should have said earlier," Tully began, his voice wavering. "I was wrong. I allowed my own pain and prejudice to cloud my judgment. I failed Mina Harper, her family, and this community." The room was silent as Tully continued. "To Mina and Mr. Harper, I want to say this. I am deeply sorry. I let my past dictate my actions, and in doing so, I caused harm to an innocent child. I take full responsibility for my mistakes." Tully's voice broke slightly, and he paused to collect himself. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I am committed to changing. I will do whatever it takes to rebuild the trust I've broken." Mina, sitting beside Cedric, watched Tully intently. She saw the raw emotion in his eyes, the weight of his words. After a moment, she leaned toward her father. "Dad," she whispered, "I think he really means it." When the meeting opened for comments, Mina surprised everyone by raising her hand. Cedric hesitated, but allowed her to approach the microphone. "Hi," she began softly, her voice carrying a mix of innocence and resolve. "I just want to say something to Officer Tully." Tully looked up, his face filled with uncertainty. Mina continued, "My mom used to say that everyone deserves a second chance if they really want to change. So I forgive you, Officer Tully. I hope you can forgive yourself too." Tully's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thank you, Mina. That means more than you know." The room erupted into murmurs. While some members of the community were moved by Mina's gesture, others remained skeptical. "That's all well and good," one man said, standing to address the room. "But an apology isn't enough. There need to be real consequences for what happened." Chief Whitman stepped forward to address the crowd. "I hear your concerns, and I want to assure you that steps are being taken to ensure accountability. Officer Tully will face disciplinary action and participate in mandatory training programs. Additionally, the department will implement new protocols to prevent situations like this from happening again." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We are also committing to a series of community workshops on racial equity and bias training. Transparency will be a cornerstone of our efforts moving forward." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some nodded in approval, while others crossed their arms, still skeptical. After the meeting, Cedric and Mina walked out into the cool evening air. The tension of the day still lingered, but Mina seemed lighter, her small hand slipping into her father's. "Dad," Mina said, breaking the silence, "if I can forgive him, do you think you can too?" Cedric stopped, looking down at his daughter. Her earnest expression reminded him of her mother's unwavering belief in kindness. "You're incredible, you know that," Cedric said, his voice thick with emotion. "You always see the good in people, even when it's hard." Mina smiled. "Mom would want us to forgive, right?" Cedric nodded slowly. "She would. And you're right. I'll try. For you and for her." The next day, Tully began his journey of redemption. He enrolled in mandatory training sessions focused on racial equity and community engagement. But it wasn't enough for him to simply check boxes. He wanted to do more. Tully volunteered for labor programs in Maplewood's Black community, helping to rebuild a local youth center. The work was hard, but it gave him a chance to interact with people he had once viewed through a lens of bias. One afternoon, as Tully hammered nails into a wooden beam, a young boy approached him. "Are you really a cop?" the boy asked, wide-eyed. Tully smiled faintly. "I used to be. I'm working on being better." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "I think you're doing okay." For the first time in weeks, Tully felt a glimmer of hope. At the end of the week, Mina and Cedric returned to the youth center for a community event. They spotted Tully working alongside other volunteers, sweat dripping from his brow, but a determined expression on his face. As Mina passed him, she stopped and looked up. "I hope you keep trying, Officer Tully. I believe you can do it." Tully paused, his hammer mid-swing, and met her gaze. "Thank you, Mina. I won't let you down." The chapter closes with Mina and Cedric walking away, the sun setting behind them. Though the scars of the past remained, the seeds of redemption and healing had been planted, promising a brighter future for all involved. The aftermath of the town hall meeting was felt throughout Maplewood. For Officer Grant Tully, it marked the beginning of a reckoning that could no longer be avoided. As the dust settled, Chief Marla Whitman called a press conference to announce the police department's decision regarding Tully's future. Standing behind the podium, Whitman's voice was firm. After careful review of Officer Tully's actions and his role in the mishandling of the Harper case, the Maplewood Police Department has decided on the following disciplinary actions. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the gathered reporters and community members. Officer Tully will be demoted from his current position and placed on unpaid suspension for 6 months. During this time, he will be required to complete an intensive program focused on racial equity and professional responsibility. Furthermore, he will perform community service, working directly with underserved neighborhoods in Maplewood. Whitman's tone softened slightly, but her resolve remained. "Grant, this is an opportunity for you to not only rebuild trust, but to grow as a person. Don't let it slip away." Tully stood off to the side, his expression stoic, but his clenched fists betraying the storm of emotions within him. He gave a curt nod, knowing there was no argument to be made. Tully's first day at the Maplewood Community Centre was anything but welcoming. The centre, a modest building tucked into the heart of the town's black neighbourhood, served as a haven for children and families in need. Dressed in plain clothes, Tully entered the centre, his presence drawing wary glances and murmurs from the staff and visitors. Mrs. Hall, the centre's director, greeted him with a polite but curt nod. "Officer Tully," she said, emphasizing his title with a hint of sarcasm. "We've been expecting you." "Yes, ma'am," Tully replied, unsure of how to proceed. Mrs. Hall handed him a clipboard. "You'll start with repairs on the playground equipment. The kids haven't been able to use it in weeks." Tully spent the morning tightening bolts, replacing rotted wood and repainting faded metal bars. Sweat poured down his face as he worked under the sun, his hands blistering from the unfamiliar labor. The children kept their distance, their curious eyes watching him from a safe vantage point. The older kids whispered among themselves, their skepticism clear. By lunchtime, Tully felt the full weight of their mistrust. He sat on a bench, rubbing his sore hands, and wondered if he would ever be able to bridge the gap between him and the community. Later that afternoon, as Tully packed up the tools, a familiar voice called out to him. "Grant Tully? Is that really you?" He turned to see Mrs. Lorraine, an elderly woman with a warm smile and kind eyes. She was a long-time volunteer at the community centre and, as it turned out, an old friend of Tully's late mother. "Mrs. Lorraine?" Tully asked, surprised. "It's been years since I've seen you," she said, sitting down beside him. "How's life been treating you?" Tully hesitated. "Honestly, not great." Mrs. Lorraine nodded knowingly. "I've heard about what's been happening. Tough times, huh?" Tully sighed. "I've made a mess of things. I don't think I'll ever make up for the harm I've caused." Lorraine placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Grant, your mother always believed in people's ability to change. She would never want you to be stuck in your mistakes." "I don't think I deserve forgiveness," Tully admitted, his voice heavy. Lorraine smiled gently. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about finding peace. But before you can ask for it, you need to forgive yourself." Her words struck a chord, and Tully found himself blinking back tears. "Thank you," he said softly. "I needed to hear that." Over the next few weeks, Tully immersed himself in the community centre's activities. He helped run literacy programs for children, assisted in organizing food drives, and even coached a youth basketball team. At first, his efforts were met with resistance. Parents eyed him warily, and children avoided him. But gradually, as he showed up day after day, attitudes began to shift. One afternoon, Tully sat with a group of children, helping them with their homework. A young girl named Naomi looked up at him, her big brown eyes filled with curiosity. "Why do you want to help us?" she asked bluntly. Tully paused, considering his answer. "Because I made mistakes, and I want to make things right." Naomi tilted her head. "Are you a good guy now?" Tully smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be." Through his work, Tully began to see the world through a different lens. He listened to the stories of the people he once viewed with suspicion, stories of struggle, resilience, and hope. He realized that the differences he once feared were not barriers, but opportunities to learn and grow. The walls he had built around his heart began to crumble, replaced by a genuine desire to connect and understand. During a community event at the center, Tully stood at the grill, flipping burgers for the crowd. The atmosphere was lively, filled with laughter and music. As he handed a plate to a young boy, the child looked up at him with wide eyes. "Are you really a cop?" the boy asked shyly. Tully crouched down to his level. "I was. I'm taking a break right now to learn how to be a better one." The boy's face lit up. I think you're doing good. Maybe you'll be the best cop someday. Tully chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. Thanks, kid. I'll do my best. From a distance, Mrs. Lorraine watched the scene with a smile, her faith in Tully reaffirmed. For the first time in years, Tully felt a sense of purpose that went beyond his badge. As the event wound down, he reflected on his journey so far. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, he felt he was heading in the right direction. The town hall was buzzing with anticipation. Nearly every seat was filled as Maplewood's residents gathered for the launch of the Harper Foundation for Education and Opportunity, an initiative spearheaded by Cedric Harper. The room, adorned with banners and floral arrangements, radiated a sense of new beginnings. Standing at the podium, Cedric adjusted the microphone, his commanding presence silencing the crowd. Mina stood at his side, her small hand resting lightly on his. This foundation, Cedric began, his voice calm but resolute, is born out of a desire to transform hardship into hope. What my daughter experienced should never happen to any child, anywhere. But instead of dwelling on the pain, we've decided to build something positive, something that ensures every child, regardless of background, has access to opportunity. The crowd applauded, many nodding in agreement. Cedric continued, "This isn't just about education or resources. It's about building a stronger, kinder community, one that lifts each other up rather than tearing each other down." The speech concluded to thunderous applause, with community leaders stepping forward to offer their support. Cedric's words had ignited a spark of hope, one that many in the room hadn't felt in years. Among the crowd, Maria Perez and Grant Tully sat quietly, taking in the gravity of the moment. For Maria, it was a validation of her commitment to justice. For Tully, it was a stark reminder of how far he still had to go. As the applause died down, Tully stood unexpectedly, drawing murmurs from the audience. Dressed in plain clothes, he approached the stage hesitantly. Taking the microphone, he began to speak. "I wasn't planning on saying anything today, but there's something I need to get off my chest." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to expect. Tully's voice trembled slightly as he continued. "I made a terrible mistake. A mistake that hurt not just one family, but this entire community. For that, I am truly sorry." He paused, scanning the room, his gaze briefly meeting Cedric's. "Words alone can't undo the damage I've done, and they can't erase the pain I caused. But I'm here today because I want to do more than apologize. I want to take action." The murmurs grew louder, and Tully raised his hand for silence. "I am pledging a portion of my salary to the Harper Foundation. It's a small step, but I hope it helps support the very children I once failed to understand." The room was silent for a moment, before a round of hesitant applause began, growing louder as more people joined in. Tully stepped back into the crowd, his expression a mixture of relief and vulnerability. After the applause subsided, Cedric introduced Mina. "My daughter would like to say a few words," he said, stepping aside to give her the spotlight. Mina approached the microphone, her curls bouncing as she walked. Though nervous, she straightened her shoulders and spoke with clarity. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I've learned a lot these past few weeks. I learned that sometimes people make mistakes, even big ones. But I also learned that when we forgive and work together, we can make things better." The crowd listened intently as Mina continued. "My mom always said, kindness is like a candle. It can light up many others without losing its own light. That's what I hope this foundation will be, a candle for anyone who needs it." Her words were met with a standing ovation. Mina smiled shyly as Cedric embraced her, whispering, "You were amazing, sweetheart." As the event wound down, Cedric approached Tully, who stood alone near the exit. The two men exchanged a long, silent look, before Cedric spoke. "I'll be honest," Cedric began, his tone even. "I'm still angry about what happened. I may never fully forgive you for what you put my daughter through." Tully nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I understand, and I don't expect forgiveness." "But," Cedric continued, his voice softening, "Mina has shown me that holding on to anger won't change anything. She believes in you, and if she can believe in second chances, maybe I can too." Tully's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I promise you, Mr. Harper, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of that second chance." The two men shook hands, a gesture of tentative trust and mutual understanding. A week later, Cedric and Mina joined a group of volunteers at the Maplewood Community Center. The atmosphere was lively, filled with the sound of laughter and the chatter of people working together to refurbish the space. Tully was there, hammering nails into a new set of shelves for the library. He paused when Mina approached him, her bright smile lighting up the room. "Hi, Officer Tully," she said cheerfully. "Hey, Mina," he replied, setting down his hammer. "I see you're working hard," she noted, looking at the shelves. Tully chuckled. "Trying my best. These kids deserve a nice place to learn and play." Mina's face grew serious. "I'm glad you're here. It means a lot that you're helping." Tully crouched to her level, his voice earnest. "Thank you, Mina. I promise to keep trying, to be better." As the sun began to set, Cedric and Mina stood outside the community center, watching the volunteers wrap up for the day. The building, once neglected, now stood as a symbol of renewal, its fresh paint gleaming in the golden light. "Dad," Mina said, squeezing his hand, "do you think we've made a difference?" Cedric knelt beside her, his gaze filled with pride. "Yes, sweetheart. We've helped so many people. But the person who's made the biggest difference is you." Mina tilted her head curiously. "Me?" Cedric nodded, his smile warm. "You've taught me, and everyone else, that forgiveness and kindness can change the world. You're the brightest light in my life, Mina. Thank you for being you." Mina grinned, leaning into her father's embrace. The story closes with a panoramic view of the bustling community center, laughter and joy filling the air. The scene fades to the image of a lit candle, a symbol of the enduring power of kindness and hope. As we reach the end of this emotional and thought-provoking journey, it's impossible not to take a moment to reflect on the powerful lessons embedded in Mina's story. Her resilience, Cedric's unwavering fight for justice, and Tully's difficult path toward redemption are all reminders of the complexities of human nature and the profound impact of choices made with or without understanding. This story is not just about a little girl wrongfully accused. It's about the silent prejudices that exist in society and how they can manifest in actions that harm the innocent. Mina's experience shines a light on the challenges faced by marginalized communities, the power dynamics that perpetuate these injustices, and the small but meaningful steps we can all take to bring about change. At the heart of it all is Mina's incredible ability to forgive. For a child to show such grace in the face of hardship is nothing short of inspiring. Her words about kindness being like a candle resonate deeply. It lights up others without losing its own light. How often do we as adults forget this simple but profound truth? Then there's Cedric, a father who embodies strength and determination. He reminds us of the importance of standing up against injustice, not only for our loved ones, but for everyone who might find themselves in similar circumstances. Cedric's transformation from a man filled with anger to one who embraces forgiveness is a lesson in itself. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting the pain. It means choosing to let go of hatred to create space for healing and growth. And finally, we have Tully. His story serves as a sobering reminder that change is never easy, but it's always possible. Tully could have chosen to remain defensive, to shield himself with excuses, or to walk away from his mistakes. Instead, he chose to face them, to learn from them, and to make amends. It's a reminder that accountability isn't about perfection. It's about having the courage to say, "I was wrong," and working tirelessly to make things right. Now, we'd like to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in Cedric's position? Could you have forgiven someone who hurt your family? Do you believe people like Tully can truly change, or do past actions always overshadow attempts at redemption? Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's forgiveness helped you become a better person? Or perhaps a time when your choice to forgive changed someone else's life? Share your stories in the comments below. Your perspectives matter, and they add so much value to these conversations. As you reflect on this story, we hope it inspires you to think deeply about your own actions, beliefs, and how we can collectively create a more understanding and compassionate society. Change begins with awareness, but it flourishes through action, both small and large. Don't let this conversation end here. Hit the subscribe button to stay connected with our channel, where we share stories that challenge, uplift, and inspire. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Together, let's continue to light candles of kindness and build a community where empathy and justice reign supreme. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay kind, stay thoughtful, and keep spreading light wherever you go.